There is a story that has been kept from you. Not by accident. Not by oversight. But by design. A story so powerful, so undeniable, so world-altering that those who controlled the pen of history decided it was safer buried than told. The story of a black African kingdom that did not just survive alongside one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known, it conquered it 3 times. And then ruled it as pharaohs for nearly a century. This is not mythology. This is not Afrocentric imagination filling in the gaps of an incomplete record. This is documented history, carved in stone, confirmed by archaeology, cross-referenced by scholars across continents. And yet most people, including many in the African diaspora, have never heard it told with the weight and reverence it deserves. For every black person who has ever been told their ancestors contributed nothing towards civilization, for every child who grew up without a mirror in the history books, for every descendant of the African continent who has been made to feel like a footnote in someone else's story, this history is yours. It always was. It was simply taken from you. Today, we give it back. To understand the magnitude of what the Kingdom of Kush accomplished, you must first understand what Egypt was. By the 8th century BCE, Egypt was already ancient. It was not a rising power. It was the established center of the known world. Its pyramids were already over 1,000 years old. Its bureaucratic systems, its religious traditions, its artistic and architectural achievements had influenced civilizations from the Mediterranean to the Near East. Egypt was the benchmark. It was the empire against which all others measured themselves. And sitting to its south, along the sweeping bend of the Nile in what is today northern Sudan, was a kingdom that had watched Egypt for centuries, learned from it, traded with it, fought with it, and ultimately decided it was time to surpass it. The Kingdom of Kush had its roots stretching back to at least 2500 BC, with its earliest major center at Kama, a city that archaeologists have confirmed was one of the most sophisticated urban settlements in Africa during its time. Kama had monumental mud brick structures, elaborate burial traditions, and a thriving trade network that connected sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean world. Over the following centuries, Kush evolved through periods of Egyptian occupation, cultural exchange, and fierce independence, eventually establishing a new capital at Napata, near the sacred mountain of Jebel Bakr, which the Kushites believed to be the home of the god Demonios. It was from Napata that the 25th dynasty, the dynasty that would change everything, was born. The king who launched this transformation was Kashta, who in the mid-8th century BC extended Kushite influence northward into Upper Egypt. But it was his son, Piye, who delivered the full force of Kushite ambition upon the Egyptian world. Around 744 BC, Piye marched his army northward through the Nile Valley in a military campaign of breathtaking scale and precision. He did not fight like a conqueror pillaging a foreign land. He fought like a man reclaiming something sacred. He swept through city after city, Hermopolis, Heracleopolis, Memphis, defeating every coalition of Egyptian princes and warlords who stood against him. When he finally entered Memphis, the ancient capital of Egypt, he went first to the temple, not the palace. He performed the sacred rites. He presented himself not as a foreign invader but as the true and rightful protector of Egypt's divine order. He was crowned pharaoh. A black African king from the south stood at the apex of the greatest civilization on earth, and he had earned it on the battlefield and consecrated it at the altar. The deliberate suppression of Kushite history is one of the most sustained and systematic acts of cultural erasure in modern scholarship. When European Egyptologists began excavating and cataloguing the ancient world in the 18th and 19th centuries, they operated within a framework of racial hierarchy that simply could not accommodate the truth of what they were finding. The concept that black Africans had ruled Egypt, not as servants, not as slaves, not as peripheral figures, but as pharaohs, as god-kings, as the supreme rulers of a civilization Europeans themselves idolized, was ideologically intolerable. So the record was bent. Kushite pharaohs were routinely described in early European scholarship in ways that minimized their African identity. Some scholars argue that the Kushites were not truly black, deploying the same pseudoscientific racial taxonomy that had been constructed to justify colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. Illustrations of Kushite rulers in popular books and museum displays were often lightened, their features softened or Europeanized. The 25th dynasty was consistently treated as a footnote, a brief interruption in Egyptian history, rather than what it actually was, a 95-year reign of one of the most sophisticated ruling dynasties the ancient world had ever produced. Museum collections in London, Paris, Berlin, and Boston housed Kushite artifacts while providing minimal context about their origin or significance. Textbooks in American schools through most of the 20th century either omitted the Nubian pharaohs entirely or mentioned them in a single dismissive sentence. Even the word Nubia itself, derived from the ancient Egyptian word for gold, was gradually stripped of its political and civilizational significance, reduced in popular imagination to a vague geographic region rather than the homeland of a conquering empire. The Assyrian invasion that eventually ended the 25th dynasty around 656 BC was amplified in historical narratives while the century of Kushite rule was compressed and diminished. This was not careless scholarship. This was the archaeology of racism, the deliberate excavation of inconvenient truths and their burial under layers of Eurocentric interpretation. And yet, what they buried refused to stay buried. The evidence of Kush is written in stone that time itself cannot fully erase. The pyramids of Meroe, smaller, steeper, and more numerous than those of Giza, still rise from the desert of modern Sudan, over 200 of them, many built centuries after the Egyptian pyramid building tradition had faded. They are among the most extraordinary architectural achievements in human history, and they stand as physical testimony that the Kushite civilization did not simply imitate Egypt, it extended it, evolved it, and outlasted it. The Kushite rulers who built these monuments were following a tradition they had refined and made their own, expressing through stone a state